Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terrence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is syndicated cartoonist Guy Gilchrist. Guy, welcome to Comic Culture. Now, I'd like to talk to you about, I think, what is the holy grail of cartooning, which is working on a syndicated strip. And in your career, you've worked on the Muppets strip, and you're currently working on Nancy and Sluggo. And I'm just wondering, how did you manage to fall into that pot of good luck?
Well, gosh, where do you want to start? I started out in comic books. I was doing, when I was just a kid, when I was a teenager, I did a little work for Charlton Comics, and eventually I got a job writing and drawing a comic strip for Weekly Reader. They used to have all kinds of children's books, game books, comic books, all sorts of things that went out every month all over the country. And that was kind of how I got my start. And from there, the Muppets was, believe it or not, at 24 years old, my first gig, right? I mean, like, the most popular comic ever launched all around the world, all at the same time, simultaneously. I'm 24 years old. I still got my training wheels on, and this is my gig, right? Unbelievable.
So 24 and you're working for the Muppets. How do you get selected for a strip like that? Because I'm assuming Jim Henson, from what I've read about him, he was very possessive of his creations and wanted to make
Very
sure
much so.
that
Yeah.
he had the right message out there. So how do you impress him at age 24?
Well, it was a really long process, but it's kind of a cool one, and it has a nice moral at the end for everybody listening. I was doing a comic book for Weekly Reader, and it was a funny animal comic. And the Museum of Cartoon Art, that Mort Walker, who created Beetle Bailey and High and Lois and Boner's Ark and many, many other strips, Mort had taken a lot of his fortune and invested it in starting a museum to make cartoon art and comic strip art an art form, which was kind of unheard of in the 1970s. Anyway, as soon as I found out that that place existed, I was down there all the time, meeting these great cartoonists that were all of my idols, and the people that I copied everything off of just meant the world to me. Mort would have a famous cartoonist once a month come and speak in a little auditorium right there in the castle. And every once in a while, they couldn't show up for one reason or another, and they'd have to get a local person to do it. Now, many of the local people were like Dick Brown, who did Hagar, John Cullen Murphy of Prince Valiant and Big Ben Bolt. But every once in a while, they couldn't get anybody. And since I hung around all the time, and I was already used to talking in front of people because of the work that I did in schools, and also I had a rockabilly band, and so I was a big ham, I did some of the talks, and Mort said, "Hey, you're pretty good at that, but no one knows what you do. So why don't you bring some of your artwork down, and we'll actually schedule a talk for you and put your artwork up in the little lobby there." So he ostensibly gave me a one-man art show of my funny animal comic, and he never forgot it. Okay, that's the preamble. Now here we go. So a month or two later, Bill Yates, who was the head of King Feature Syndicate, the largest syndicate in the world, was out golfing with his friend Mort Walker. And Bill told Mort that they had had a contract for almost a year now for a development of a Muppet Show comic strip based on the most popular show in the world. And they had tried out 200 artists and writers roughly, and the Henson people didn't like any of them. And Mort said, "Well, it's a pig, a frog, and a bear, right?" He said, "Yeah, yeah. And we're going to lose this contract because we've got nobody." He says, "Well, there's this hippie kid." Hangs out. I got the phone call. I couldn't pass out and just die because I had an immediate deadline. He wanted to see me in a week with some strips. I did them. He liked them enough. He asked for more. And then over a period of one full year, because I wasn't told not to, I just kept drawing sample strips. And every once in a while, I'd get called in to New York, and once I even got to meet with Michael Frith, the head of all creative at Henson. And he liked my stuff, but he wasn't committing to anything. But for me, this was the coolest thing that could ever happen. So I would draw my comic book and do my regular work during the day. And every night I would draw for free and I would mail it into New York City. And eventually the phone rang. It was a year later, and it was Jerry Jewell, the head writer of the Muppets. And he told me that not only did I have the job, but I had had the job for over a month, and everybody thought that somebody else had called me. So there you go.
That's amazing.
And so there I was with this incredible charge. I had to learn all of the characters, how they acted, all of their personalities. Any mistake I made was going to be in a red hot frying pan. We were in People magazine, on the Today Show, everything, you know, and I was just a kid. And, you know, I did the absolute best that I could. Eventually, before the strip launched, Jim had me come up to the city, and he put me up at the Waldorf. Yes, there's actually a hotel named after one of those grumpy old men in the balcony. Actually, there's two. There's Statler too. And I stayed there for a week, and I learned everything that there was to learn about the Muppets. And then on the Saturday at the end of the week, Jim flew in on the Concorde to meet me. And, you know, I wasn't too freaked out or anything. I was there like at 8 o'clock talking to the janitor, right? And I had a 12 o'clock meeting with Jim. So I sat in this bowling alley of an incredibly beautiful conference room at 117 East 69th Street, which was Muppet Central. They had a carpet, a burgundy carpet, the same color as the curtains on the Muppet Show. And then embedded into the carpet, they had golden carpet, yellow gold carpet, that ran in a little path all the way up the spiral staircase. And when it got to the very top of the townhouse, it ended in a little swirl right there at the feet of where Jim Henson would be at his desk. He was the wizard. That was the yellow brick road. And anyway, I sat there waiting for him and drawing pictures, and the door bopped open at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was him. And he had a knapsack on his back, and he was wearing earth shoes, and there he was. And he just went, "Oh, you must be Guy. You're early. I guess we'll be talking later on. I'm looking forward to it." And he bopped up the stairs. And my heart definitely had stopped beating, and I forgot how to breathe. And a couple hours later, there I was talking to Jim. And from that moment on, I knew exactly how important the strip was to Jim. Jim was a huge comics fan. He loved Pogo. And I think one of the reasons I got the job at such a young age was I used a brush, and I was sort of a Disney guy, so I think he kind of made that connection. And also, I understood the characters pretty well, I guess. I've always actually considered myself a writer who hires the cheapest illustrator he can find. Me. But anyway, Jim introduced me to Kermit that day by holding up his right hand and talking. And at that moment, I realized that I was drawing life. These characters had actual life, blood flowing through them. And it changed my whole perspective on how I was going to do the feature. Jim worked with me very, very closely on the strip. He loved the strip, and it was a pet project of his. And I cannot tell you how much he meant to me as a creative father, as a person who taught me the value of sticking to my guns and doing what I felt was morally correct and what was in my heart to write and do. Everything that I've learned, everything that I've done, over all of these years, and I've had a very long career now, is all based on what I learned through Jim Henson.
That is amazing. To have that experience at such a young age and have it, I guess, profoundly change your life in both an artistic and personal way.
If you had met him, wouldn't it have changed your
life? Oh, absolutely.
I mean, come on.
Absolutely. I can think back fondly to the times watching The Muppet Show and, of course, Sesame Street, and To this day, I will debate my friends about whether or not Grover or Elmo are the better character, and I know in my heart it's Grover. Um, Now, when you're working on a strip like this,
I
you
can't play favorites, but
I appreciate that non-endorsement. When you're working on a strip like this, you're dealing with, you said, real living characters. So as an artist, how do you get that sort of body language that we're all familiar with when we see, someone like Frank Oz bringing Miss Piggy to life? How do you
yeah,
bring that to life on a drawn page?
very difficultly. It's crazy because immediately you're in two dimensions and you're in black and white. And the Muppets is all music and mayhem. And if we can't figure out a way to end this skit, let's blow something up. And uh, and there's the voices and the guest stars and all of this. And here we were really trying to fit a symphony into a phone booth, you know. Um, but if you understand what makes the characters tick and what makes the world of the characters tick, I think you've at least got something to go on. And when we really look at things, the Muppets were based on a humor and a silliness that was based on love and caring. When you really think about it, all of the characters are like every nationality, every gender, everything you could ever imagine. They're all mismatched characters that are a family. And they have squabbles and they have arguments and they have to buoy each other up and help each other through. And so the humor is based on that very, very silly stuff, but very, very heartfelt love and caring. And I can hear people already going, yeah, but the two old guys, they hate the Muppets. No, they don't. They love Fozzie Bear. They love Gonzo. If they didn't have any balcony to go to, they wouldn't even bother putting new batteries in their pacemakers, for crying out loud. And Fozzie, he loves them because he has no timing whatsoever. And if they weren't out there to heckle him, there'd be nothing for Fozzie. So when we start really looking at the characters and basing all of our humor out of slapstick stuff and silliness, of course, and blowing things up, but at the basis of it, never ever humiliating anyone, never saying anything out of anger or hatred, never bullying, you wind up with a wonderful, wonderful garden to grow your ideas. And it not only has been a wonderful garden to grow the ideas that I did with Jim working on the Muppets and then Fraggles and Muppet Babies and all of that, but all of the children's books I've written over all of these years and the 20 years now with Nancy, with that other unconventional family going, there's never been a project that I've ever worked on that strayed from the ideals that I learned there.
That's amazing. Like I said, lessons that you learn that profoundly change your whole life and help shape your career. Now, you are currently also working on Nancy, which
Yes,
is one of the oldest strips, I think, in the history of
I
comics.
believe it's the second. I think it's the second oldest. Um, but I believe it's the first oldest strip that it's the first oldest strip that's still in daily syndication. But I believe the Cats and Jammers, which would predate Nancy, is still done on Sundays.
Okay.
Yeah. So because we started out, my gosh, Nancy started out actually as Fritzy Ritz in 1922. And then 11 years later, in 1933, that's when this little girl showed up with a little valise at this flapper's apartment house to drive her nuts. And that was Nancy. And I'm sure that Ernie just thought it was going to be a week or 2 week story, but she really caught on. And so much so that by 1938, they switched the name of the daily from Fritzy Ritz to Nancy. And she met a little dead end kid out in the alley named Sluggo. And Ernie did the strip until Ernie Bushmiller did the strip until his death. He died when I was doing the Muppets, and I took over the strip in 1995. And it's been a crazy, wonderful ride. I've had a blast.
Now, you're dealing with a character that's much like the Muppets, is sort of embedded in American pop culture.
Hmm.
Um, I'm imagining that you have some limitations on how you can, put a strip together, how far you can go with the joke, and it seems like
Hmm.
your humor is obviously working for a broader audience. But when you're working essentially in somebody else's playground, how does that impact you as a storyteller?
Well, I actually looked at it the exact same way that I looked at it when I was doing the Muppets or any of the other stuff that I've done over the years. In that, I'm not just babysitting a worldwide icon, but I have to find a way to continually bring that to life and refresh that so that it doesn't get stale and the character is out there and maintains the level of popularity. So certainly when I first started Nancy. I was very, very hesitant to draw anything that Ernie would not have drawn. And I slavishly tried to draw and ink exactly like the master. And then over time, what winds up happening is there becomes a sort of some sort of a mishmash, a mashup of you and him. But it's so gradual that the readers really don't see it over time. As far as the writing, which is actually way, way more important than the art. I mean, yeah, drawing good, that's a good thing. That's a good thing if you can draw good. Uh, but if you have nothing to say, no one's going to read you, no matter how well it's illustrated. And so um, I had to look at what Ernie did, the kind of gags that he liked to do, what stuff didn't work any longer, and what he would have changed and how he would have evolved as time went on. But also look at what I felt like was the heart of the feature. And to me, the heart of the feature was that Nancy and Sluggo were both orphans who got a second chance being taken care of by people that probably weren't blood relatives. And that was sort of their bond, Nancy and Sluggo's bond, but it was also the bond of Aunt Fritzy to the kids. And so everything that I've done over the years has been to move that along. One of the other changes that I made was I went back to something that I think Ernie would be really psyched about. See, back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, everyone read the funnies. So you could have continuing stories in addition to have a gag a day. But then in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they didn't want the newspaper publishers did not want you to do that anymore because they were hesitant to take on a feature that they felt like, well, if you missed Monday and Tuesday, you wouldn't understand the thread of the story that was going along. But with the internet and with our apps and with our everything that we have now, with years and years you can read of my feature, now I can do stories again like Ernie did of 3 and 4 and 5 weeks. And people can read today. And if they didn't read yesterday or the last few weeks, they can go online and immediately catch up. So it's really, really fun because I can advance storylines. We can have a little bit more adventure and a little bit more fun.
Well, it's
Like
interesting.
the old days.
I was going to say, when I was growing up in the 1970s, before I started school, my mom and I would read the paper at lunch. And although I couldn't read, I would always turn to the Daily News. The New York Daily News would have 2 pages of funnies, and I'd always have to make sure I read Peanuts and Blondie and of course, Beetle Bailey.
Yeah.
And the thing that always struck me was that it seemed like every summer Charles M. Schulz would take the Peanuts characters on a longer story, whether it was Charlie Brown going to camp or whether, I believe, one year Peppermint Patty was preparing for an ice skating competition and Snoopy was her coach. And that sort of connection to the characters, like you say, did seem to diminish. But you're saying that the internet has given us that second connection to these characters where we can find them, whereas we might not find them in the paper. Because from what I understand, the syndicated comics are losing territory in newspapers simply because the cost of paper has gone up and the cost of ink has gone up.
Sure.
Um,
Well, a few years back, before the syndicates began to start understanding how to monetize things, and also before the advent of social media or the explosion of social media, uh, you know, every time we lost a paper, we lost a lot of readers. And about 5 years ago or so, uh, the monetization of the internet began to happen. We started figuring out, the micropayments and this and this and this. And then about 2 years ago or so, we started putting the strip on Facebook and Twitter and now Instagram and on and on and on. There's not one platform you can find that doesn't have Nancy on it. We also have a Go Comics app that you can download for free, and plus we have the Go Comics website, and we have the Nancy and Sluggo website where you can read them. Well, what's happened is, even though we keep losing papers, and we had 40 million, only 40 million reading us in 80 countries around the world 5 or 6 years ago, we now have 57 million people reading us every day. Because we figured a few things out. You're not going to stop progress, and the actual paper is gonna go the way that it goes. There's nothing I, as a content provider, can do about it. What I can do is draw the best I can, try to write good jokes and compelling storylines that are going to make you want to find it in your feed, on your phone or on your tablet, or on your computer, or if you still get it in the paper, you're going to read me in the paper.
It's interesting because I think the strips that have managed to survive are the strips that had that name recognition. And I think when you read the paper, I'm living in a smaller town now where the paper has a lot of the lesser known strips, but a lot of the older strips. So we get our Peanuts, and we get our Beetle Bailey and our Hagar the Horrible. But we also get Rhymes with Orange and the Edison Lee strip. And some of those strips, I think, just because they're in the smaller papers, don't get the acclaim that they deserve.
Yeah.
And the internet gives them a chance to find those audiences. Now, you mentioned Gag a Day, which is, I guess, when you write a self-contained 2 or 3 panel story or joke for that week's or that day's paper. How long does it take you to work on a page, and what is your process?
Well, I write every day, and I write. Right now where you and I are sitting, I'm at my drawing table, and there's this huge mess all around me, and I've just cleared off this spot where I've been inking. But I write in an old 3rd grade composition book, or anything I can get my hands on. Like the other day, I was in a business meeting and I needed to write, gags, and so I had my planner, and I wrote a week's worth that I'm actually drawing now in my planner. And I'm constantly writing. I write every single day. The writing is the most important part. Then, and I write actually in 2 sort of spheres. Okay. In one case, I have these stories that I want to move along, like Fritzy and Phil and their romance, or Sluggo helping out at the mission, or whatever it happens to be. Or I want to get the dogs into things, and I want to do something with pets, and I want to do so. And I have notes on causes and this and that, different ideas that I have. And so I have a little notepad over there, and then over on this side, I'm writing gags, and sometimes they connect. After I decide what I'm going to do, and it usually takes about 2,000 gags or jokes or stories, 2,000 little bits to make up the 365 that I need for the year. Then I do everything in pencil first. I do 6 dailies, all in pencil. I leave the Sunday separate. It's not part of the storyline. If there is a storyline, it's all separate. And so I pencil everything, and then I go through and I ink them all at once. I letter them all at once. And it's usually about 2 or 3 days that it takes me to put all of that together. When I'm doing a Sunday page, normally I'll write the Sunday pages along with the dailies, because some jokes are longer than others. But then when I sit down to do the Sunday page, I'll usually draw 2 or 3 of them all at once, even though there's a lot more art. And then I'll leave the dailies aside, and work on the Sunday pages for a while. And that's kind of it. And I actually, and I do this either at my board or in hotel and motel rooms across the country because I do so much touring and so much speaking. At first I just used to write when I was on tour. Then I started writing and penciling when I was on tour. Now I'm inking and I'm still, and the last time I was in the Midwest and I was on deadline, I was in Iowa and I drove all through the night to get to Kansas City and I dropped the originals off at Universal like you would have in the old days, so that they could scan them and get them out. Because deadlines never sleep, and deadlines, it doesn't matter what's going on in your life. There's a hole in the paper, and you're supposed to fill it. So that's what I try to do. Now, what winds up happening is, life happens. And so you stay up all night sometimes to try to get your stuff done. Other times you're out on the road for 3-4 weeks and you can't get everything done. So when you come back, you like working like a spinning, Tasmanian devil, trying to get it all done. And you're going like, okay, well, the heck with my ink pot and my pens and everything. Where's my Sharpies? I mean, I got to do this quick. And you just hope that that whatever you do that day winds up being the best that you can make it. It's been 20 years now with Nancy, not missing a deadline. And
well, we have just a little under a minute left, and it seems
seriously? We've been talking that long?
I'm telling you, once we have a good conversation, the time just seems to fly by. And what strikes me is you have such an intense passion about what you're doing. That even though you're on the road, you're still out there, you're being creative, and I'm being told we have to wrap up. Guy Gilchrist, thank you so much for being with us on Comic Culture, and thank you everyone at home for watching. We'll see you again next time.